This week's Four Questions Journalist Spotlight is brought to you by Leff's Atlanta Media, Atlanta's best journalist database. Subscribe at leffsatlantamedia.com.
Welcome to another edition of our Four Questions Journalist Spotlight. We are talking today with Sophia Qureshi, who has a digital publication called 285South, and I'm going to let Sophia kind of give us the background on it, and I'm going to talk about a little bit about her background, how she got where she is, and I want to talk a lot about 285 South because the content is really incredible. So, good morning, Sophia.
Good morning, Mitch. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, let's start first with what is 285 South, and then we'll talk a little bit about your background too.
Yeah, 285 South is a newsletter that focuses and is centered around Metro Atlanta's immigrant and refugee communities. So I launched it in August 2021. And the idea was I've worked in media many, many years, for international media, for national media, and I moved back to Atlanta. So I grew up in Alpharetta, Johns Creek, and I moved away after graduating from UGA. And I lived away for about 17 years. And when I came back, I was really amazed by how much Metro Atlanta had changed. And I was also surprised that there wasn't one publication that brought together the stories of all these different immigrant communities that have grown so much over the last 20 years. So it was like my attempt to create a space for those stories and to publish regularly about those communities.
Yeah, there's a lot of publications that focus on one particular community, Chinese or Indian or Hispanic communities,
right.
but they focus on their communities, and a lot of them are in their languages. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it appeals to that community that way.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. There has not been for many years any kind of overall wider effort to kind of address all the variety
Mm-hmm.
of Atlanta's international community. I mean, I will say that years ago, this is probably going back 20, 25 years, the AJC had a special section on Atlanta. I think it was called Atlanta International or something like that. And they covered a lot of these kinds of things. But as with so many things with media, it was around for a few years and then it wasn't.
Yeah. And I feel like now, it's like, given how much these communities have grown, and they're literally like changing the landscapes of, parts of Metro Atlanta in a whole new way, for us not to have one place where we could start to try to understand that would be a shame.
So I want to say this several times in the next 15 minutes, but where do you find 285 South? How does someone find it?
Yeah, so right now 285 South is on Substack. So you just go to 285south.substack.com. You can also, I have an Instagram page, I have a Facebook page, and I have a Twitter handle. So you could also find 285 South that way.
Okay. And is it at 285 South on all of those other platforms?
Kind of.
Kind of. Okay. I know. I've had a couple of those too where I thought no one else will have this handle, and then I go look and say, oh, really? That's an organization in France that sounds similar to what I wanted.
Yeah.
So, okay.
So on Facebook, that's probably my biggest community. It's SJQ 285 South is like the Facebook.
Okay. All right. But if you went into Twitter and Instagram, put in 285 South, you'd probably find something that would make it would probably be fairly easy to find, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
There's no other, besides like the interstate here, there is no other 285 South that I know of. So.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, there you go. Well, I'll also after we're done here today, in kind of post-production, I can put in the URLs at the bottom so it'll flow across the screen as we're talking, and people can see what the handles are for all of those. So we'll have that included in there too, and I'll put it in the tags and show notes when I push this out so people can find it.
Thanks.
So what's your background? Where did you work? What did you do before you started 285 South?
Yeah, so my first job in media was, I guess, about almost 20 years ago now. I started out interning at CNN in the New Delhi bureau. So I grew up like just, in Atlanta. So CNN was always like part of my thinking about media. And so that was my first internship in media. And I like really loved being part of helping cover international news, especially news in India for an international audience. After that, I worked at CNN in their DC bureau for a while. I used to basically run teleprompter for Wolf Blitzer and like run scripts back and forth between the studio and the newsroom. And I did that for about 2 years. And then I would say the majority of my professional experience was at Al Jazeera English, which if viewers don't know is an international news channel. I started out as a producer in the newsroom. I would book a lot, actually kind of like what you're doing now. I would find people to talk to and book interviews and set them up with our anchors. And after about 12 to 15 years working at Al Jazeera, I kind of moved into communications and advocacy for racial justice. So that was I was doing right before I launched 285 South. I was working at an organization called South Asian Americans Leading Together, which is a South Asian immigrant rights and racial justice organization, where I was the director of communication. So a lot of what I was doing was actually, that work that you're very familiar with was like pitching stories to journalists and trying to get them to cover some of the issues that we cared about.
So talk to me about some of the topics and stories that you've found over the last year or two with 285 South. What are some of the issues and stories that you've covered that really kind of resonated for you?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the big ones that I covered, so I launched 285 South in August 2021, and that's also when the Taliban took over Afghanistan, and there was that massive chaotic evacuation of people out of Kabul to get out of Afghanistan. And so I really tried to follow how that played out. So I was covering, as soon as Afghans started to arrive in Metro Atlanta, I was covering like what that was like for them, what their journey had been like. And then, I covered like what the initial landing was like over here. But I've also like stayed with that story and just been covering like what it's like to start a new life here, kind of what the infrastructure was like as well in Atlanta for welcoming people at that large of a number that quickly. So that's definitely a story I've been following through different families I've connected with over the last 2 years. Another story another topic is mental health. I think there's like a lot of unique challenges for immigrant and refugees around identifying mental health needs and then finding the right support. As we know, like in Georgia, it's getting better, but it's not ranked the highest among like mental health resources for all of its residents. But there's
for sure.
There's specific challenges as well if you might not speak English from a different cultural orientation. And then I also really like doing stories about food and local businesses. So I've done a lot of stories. I did a story about Bismillah Cafe, which is like a small Bangladeshi, kind of almost like street food style restaurant on Buford Highway. They just opened a restaurant that's next to their first location. And so I'll be writing about that. I just published a story in Atlanta Magazine, if you check out the January issue, about a Rohingya refugee and his journey here and his recent trip back to visit his parents in a refugee camp in Bangladesh. So I know these are like, I'm throwing a lot out.
Yeah, no.
Sorry. Talking.
Are you, I was going to ask you, are you partnering with other media outlets around town to kind of have them use your stories as well?
Yeah. So, I have the newsletter, but I've also done stories with Atlanta Magazine. I've done 2 stories with the Atlanta History Center. I have another one coming out this year. So I kind of try to do a combination of like publishing regularly with the newsletter, but then working on bigger pieces with some of the local media outlets. Definitely this year, one of my focus is going to be doing more collaborations and trying to find ways for 285 South to grow that way.
Yeah, it'd be cool if you could, I don't know, not to put more work on you. Yeah, my mind is kind of spinning with, you should partner with this newspaper and that newspaper, and
Yeah.
you do this, get a regular segment on this TV station.
Oh, yeah. I will say that, like, I've definitely been encouraged by the local media in Atlanta, that I feel like there is interest in these stories, and they are looking to diversify content and diversify contributors. So, yes, I'm very encouraged. I'm just one person, but like it's so good.
Well, I would say that so often, I don't say all the time, but often, you'll see when some media covers an immigrant community, it's not a positive story, right? I mean, is that safe to say?
It is safe to say. And I feel like, so sometimes, I'll try to check myself, because sometimes I feel like, oh no, I've like published too many sad stories, and there's like so much hope and there's a lot of joy. And so I feel like some of that I try to do through, sometimes it's food and culture, but also like I try to identify people in the community who are really making a difference and who kind of might be invisible, but like, they're providing some really vital service. So I try to highlight stories like that. But I agree that often it feels like there is this kind of like, oh, the poor immigrants, like sad story of people who came from here and now it sucks, or
well, and it's and
fall into that.
Yeah, and sometimes it's people who don't have the knowledge or resources or understanding of the processes to get their story told. We do a lot of work with them. There's a business accelerator program over at Emory at the business school called Start Me.
Yeah, I know about them.
Start Me. Okay, so they focus on East Lake, South Atlanta, and Clarkston. So a lot of the small businesses that they work with are immigrants, you often first generation people who are starting up small business, and these are folks who have just great ideas. They're so incredibly hardworking, and they are building their businesses, but they need help with understanding, how do I market it? How do I find capital? How do I set up the accounting? So there's like a few groups in town that help them do that, and it's some of it's food, but some of it's apparel and skincare products and services. I mean, there's so many different things that these small businesses do, and they, obviously, definitely with the food, their culture is a part of it. And I will say, I'm a huge fan of Beaufort Highway.
Oh yeah.
If my wife and I weren't worried about going bankrupt, we would eat there more often. But yeah, there's so many great restaurants there, and it's much fun just to try something that you haven't tried before.
Yeah. I would say, like, on that START program, I don't know if he was part of this, but a few months ago I met somebody. He's from Afghanistan, and he has a business. He's incredibly talented. He does wood carving, and his business was called Ariana Wood Carving. And he learned how to do wood carving in Iran. And he has a little studio, and he's trying to market himself on Instagram, but he also, like, he works at a warehouse during the day. So he doesn't have the time to like fully invest in his business, but he has this incredible talent. And I feel like there are a lot of stories like that, where there needs to be some more support, maybe on PR, marketing.
Yeah, that's always a part of what the Start Me folks do, is talk about how to market your business, because no one knows about it, that no one's going to go there or buy your products. But you should check with him. If he doesn't know about Start Me, I'm happy to connect him. I know they were taking applications for this year. I'm not sure where they are on the application process at this point. So are there certain other topics that you're looking at right now, kind of that are on your mind that you want to cover? What is some issues that are kind of top of mind right now?
So one of the issues I want to cover, so last year I did a story looking at a low-income apartment complex on Beaufort Highway, actually, where a bunch of the residents were impacted by really awful sewage issues. These issues have been continuing. at varying degrees. But I really hope to do more on like some of the housing issues that have come up. Obviously, low-income housing has issues for residents across Atlanta, but I think like with immigrant communities and low-income housing, there's additional challenges. So I really hope to cover that. I
think that's important. I mean, there've been I've seen some coverage in other media lately around those issues of absentee landlords and investment companies buying up apartment complexes and not putting the resources into upkeep or security or that kind of thing. And I feel like part of it is that it's people who are either immigrants who don't speak the language as well, or people who are not as economically fortunate to have the resources or the partners to fight back and ask for help and whatnot. So that's I'm glad to hear you're doing that.
And there's also a lack of housing. So, even if they're in bad conditions, if there's not enough available low-income housing, like where do they go? So then sometimes you're forced to stay in bad situations.
Yeah. Okay. So my next question is this is sometimes a more challenging question for folks is what's something cool or fun about Sophia that people might not know about? And this could
had to think about this a lot. And
that's why I give people this question ahead of time.
I had a conversation with my husband about it, and we both concluded that I was very boring. But I do have this like weird superpower, which is I can like not look at my phone or a watch or the time for hours, like 4 hours would go by. And I could then, if someone asked me the time, I can like get it accurately to like the minute. Like I could not look at my phone, from 8 a.m. until 1. And if you asked me like after lunch what time it was, I'd be like 1:23.
All right, what time is it now?
Oh no, it's 11. I'm not going to cheat. 11:17.
11:20. Very close enough. I'm gonna take that. Okay. Judges. Okay, the judges are gonna accept that 11:17 as the answer. Okay, all right. So, lightning round here.
Okay.
So what's the last? And you don't have to go into detail, but what's the last book you've read or the last podcast you've listened to?
The last book I read and completed was sometimes I start and don't complete. It's called, I actually have it right here, Strangers to Ourselves. It's an amazing book written by Rachel Aviv. It's a nonfiction book that basically looks at like, it's also about kind of mental health, but it's like 3 different stories of people and how they understand their own journey. Right.
Okay. All right. Favorite local restaurant?
I have a few.
All right. I can do more. I can do more. You can do 2. How about 2?
Okay.
Top 2.
I love the vegan platter at Desta, the Ethiopian restaurant on Briarcliff.
Yep.
And then I want to plug Siamese Basil Thai, which is a Thai restaurant in Norcross. I did a really long story about them and how like the building that they're in like burned down half of it, but they are still standing. They just have like a really amazing kind of home style Thai food.
Okay. Favorite guilty pleasure?
Definitely dark chocolate.
All right. What's your favorite local getaway?
So right when I moved back to Atlanta, I was in Gwinnett County in Tucker, and my parents still live there. So I love going to Tucker, and specifically there's a park there called Kelley Cofer Park, where there's a lake, and across the lake is this amazing garden, like an edible garden. So if you go in the spring or the summer, there'll be like peaches growing on the trees. In the fall, there's persimmons growing. There's blueberry bushes. And I love going there while my husband and kids fish across the street.
All right. And last is favorite non-work hobby.
I actually really enjoy cooking for people. I love like, I don't know if you've had daal before, but I love cooking, like get into like a meditative state when I cook like a big pot of daal.
Okay, so I'm going to give you an extra 10 seconds to explain to me what daal is because I'm not entirely familiar.
Oh I have to cook it. Okay. Basically it's lentils, slow cooked with spices. So it's kind of like a creamy, soupy
Okay.
curry, but it's like a staple for South Asian cuisine.
Okay. I have to find a restaurant where I can
Yeah.
get that. All right.
Any South Asian restaurant will have it.
Is it Dahl?
It could be spelled like that or Daal.
Dahl. Okay.
Good
All right.
on like a cold, wintry day.
Okay. All right. Excellent. We have been talking with Sophia Qureshi, who is the editor, publisher, owner of 285 South here in Atlanta. Thank you so much, Sophia, for taking some time to talk with us today.
Thank you.
And as always, hit subscribe on that YouTube link, and that way you get notifications about our next podcast. And if you are looking for our database of Atlanta media, go to leffsatlantamedia.com. If you are a journalist looking for sources for stories, go to mitchesmediamatch.com, or you can just give me a call, as people often do. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks.